It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Anjoli Roy, who is going to speak on writing Enter the Navel for the Love of Creative Nonfiction, an Abecedarian Apologia for the genre. And I think she will explain to us what an Abecedarian Apologia might be. There's that old cliche of, this person needs no introduction. In this particular case, I'd like to suggest that this person certainly needs no introduction to me. I'll read what she gave us, and then I'll offer another couple of comments. Anjoli Roy is a creative writer and high school English teacher in Honolulu. She has a BA in individualized study from NYU and an MA and PhD in English from the University of Hawai at Mānoa. She is a VONA, Voices of Our Nation Arts Foundation Fellow, and a Pushcart and Best of the Net nominee. All right, that's what she supplied to us. What I'm going to add to that is I think she is probably the most qualified person ever to deliver a brown bag biography presentation. There are a few reasons for this. One of is her educational background. She came here as an MA student and in creative writing and ended up doing a creative thesis, which I had the privilege of being on the committee for. And it was heavily focused in and informed by her own experience in studying life writing, biography, autobiography. She came in with a tremendous amount of experience in editing and had worked with Women's Studies Quarterly and had worked with the feminist press. So the notion of the incredible importance of telling individual stories and making sure those stories got out there to literally try and transform the world was something that was had already been baked into her educational DNA. She then came here. She was in one of my early life writing classes. She then proceeded and kept balancing all the way through. She basically sort of moved through all the four areas that were emphases in the English department, in that strong interest in cultural studies, an investment in positionality, in addition in identity. But also composition and rhetoric as a teacher, as a really noted teacher and somebody who is absolutely encouraging of other people writing. In terms of literary studies, she is a great lover, aficionado, and expert in poetry, in creative nonfiction, in fiction, has run through sort of all of the genres. And of course, the center of all of this was creative writing, whether it's creative nonfiction or fiction, and she continued to do all of these things. She left for a while, went working in public advocacy, again in an environment which was strongly encouraging, recognizing stories, came back, did a doctoral dissertation, and during that period of time, she ended up working at the Center for Biographical Research. So she's one of the few people who has given a presentation here who has actually run the series that she's about to appear in. All right. So she's more familiar with the mechanics and what goes on with a brown bag because she was in fact responsible for them for quite a period of time. And with her collaborator and co-conspirator Aiko Yamashiro basically did a spectacular job along those lines. She wrote a magnificent doctoral dissertation, which was a creative nonfiction work. And then after that, she was trying to figure out what she was sort of going to do along the way. And even before that had started in and ended up being actually the managing editor of Biography. So she has actually spent time in the critical and the theoretical environment and even copy edited and proofreaded annual bibliographies. So she probably knows more about the field than just about anybody else who has spoken here. So other than that, I don't know what she's going to do. Well, actually, I do. I've actually seen this presentation to a certain degree before, which I'm looking forward to. Of course, we invited her to speak about this. We're incredibly happy and encouraged by the fact that this work has been published. It's one of many things that have appeared since she finished her dissertation, and she was publishing extensively before that. She has contributed over the years an incredible amount to the center. We are incredibly in her debt in terms of the various expertise she's brought, and she is now benefiting an entire other community as that combination of teacher and artist and invested social person that she is. So I'm very happy to welcome her back, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Anjoli Roy.
Craig, wow, holy moly. It's funny, in my years of having worked with Craig in a variety of capacities, as him being a leader in my life in so many ways. I've witnessed him do these epic introductions, these like, this is your life, the biographies leading to these brown bag conversations, and I still wasn't prepared for that. Wow, Craig, thank you so much. It's a huge pleasure and privilege to join you all today. Thank you so much for coming. I was not expecting so many people to come. I think part of that has to do with Dr. Zern having his class here. So welcome to 73 students, writers of creative nonfiction and life writing. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that this journey is what you need it to be, and maybe it sparks something, some curiosity or interest in your life. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so I hope that everything works okay. I will give you a heads up that I have a lot of slides that are primarily visual aids in this talk. And this takes like a few seconds to load, so I don't want you to feel any kind of anxiety. I'm going to take that on myself as well. I'm not going to feel anxious. These are going to load. They just take a minute. But yeah, I just want to say it's such an honor to be with you. And I am excited for this. I'm excited. I'm making myself big. I'm so excited. Okay, I'm gonna do a quick location change. Give me 1 second. It's funny to have been teaching from home these last, I don't know, several months. Your house starts to become like a TV show. So here we go. Or rather a TV studio. All right, let's see. Hooray, I'm here with you, Center for Biographical Research. Of course, I want to start out in gratitude so much for this invitation. Cindy, John, Craig, Paige, Zoe, thank you so much for your invitation. And it's always a pleasure to come home to institutions that have raised you and shaped you. And so I'm really excited to be here with you today. I also want to shout out the publisher of this text that I'll be talking about. So again, this is the book. Here it is. Maybe you can sort of see it. The operating system. I was really fortunate to submit this work to them in fall 2019, like in November or December, I think it was. And then they accepted it like 2 weeks later, which is not normal. Usually you have to wait and sweat it out for like at least 6 months. But they were amazing and they snapped it up really fast. And so I want to give a shout out to Curtis Emery and Orchid Tierney, who were the digital chapbook coordinators, also to Eli, who is the creative director, founder, and managing editor, also the person responsible for this beautiful cover. And it's through them and the fact that the operating system is part of the Radical Open Access Collective that the work is available to read free online. So you don't have to buy it, it's just there. It's designed and beautiful. And also, if you are more paper oriented and you like kind of, flipping pages, I do too, then it's also, of course, available through Bookshop. I also have author copies. So if you want copies, a signed copy with some swag, I'd be happy to be in touch with you about that. I am joining you here today in Makiki on this island of Oahu, which is, of course, Hawaiian land. And I'm bringing with me my ancestors who are from West Bengal. My dad is from India. And also my mom's kind of white American side is kind of hails from Germany, England, and Ireland. I was born and raised in Southern California, and as Craig's beautiful introduction acknowledged, I came to Hawaii for graduate school, and I got so much more than the degrees that I am still so proud of too. But really the kinds of partnerships and lessons that I continue to learn here, I feel so grateful for. And I hope that this little chapbook in its potentially awkward experimental form is perhaps one of the tributes that I might write in my life to this place and the community that I'm fortunate enough to be a part of. Okay, so where did the idea for this chapbook come from? I knew that I had been someone in studying life writing, and as a creative writer myself, I had heard this epithet, this insult, and it's like an old-fashioned insult. It was not one that everyone has heard of. I feel like some younger folks, like I teach high school, they're like, what are you talking about? I've never heard this epithet before. And so it felt kind of weird to write a chapbook about an epithet that folks didn't know necessarily, because in some ways I'm kind of like perpetuating the epithet by offering it to people. But that epithet is navel-gazer. And so the idea was that I was hearing, again, as a person who consumes creative nonfiction, but also wrote it, that those people who are invested in writing their own lives and their own stories were navel-gazers. A navel-gazer is, of course, as I mentioned in this chapbook, and as we'll get to in a little bit when I do some reading from it for you, is essentially someone who's so self-absorbed that it's at the expense of a wider view, that they can't see outside their own needs. They're not interested in anything outside of their own lives. And so as somebody who's interested in language, I was like, where did that term even come from? And if I'm sort of feeling defensive about this idea, like, okay, creative nonfiction writers, maybe we're navel-gazers, maybe we are. I wanted to get to the root of that language. So I found myself heading to the dictionary. I'm also someone who ends up in a lot of weird rabbit holes on the internet, which I think this chapbook also is evidence of. And so ultimately, I kind of had some interesting things that came together. So I figured I might write a little text about it. But to get us warmed up, and if you don't mind, because I'm a high school teacher, I was thinking we might do a little activity together, my friends. So you're at home, you might, or home or work or wherever you are, wherever you're joining from. Thank you again for being here. I was thinking you might grab, I don't know, Google Doc if you want, Word doc, piece of paper and pen if you're old school. Like this is picturing here. I love a good journal, scrap of paper, a receipt, whatever you want. But I thought we might do some writing together on this Thursday. This is going to be quick. It's going to be quick and painless and relatively anonymous, because here we are on Zoom. Who knows what you're going to write? It's going to be private. Maybe you'll share part of it. Maybe you won't. You have your own autonomy there. But please do get something to write with and something to write on. Why not? We're going to do a free write. I know a lot of you are in creative writing classes, which is awesome. I'm assuming you are very familiar with this idea of the free write. In its purest form, the free write, of course, is something where you just turn off the inner editor that you might have in your mind, that thing that like nags you about spelling and punctuation and what you're doing with your life. You give that thing like a snack, or you tell it to go on a walk, whatever one feels more applicable for your inner editor. And you just kind of open up a faucet in your mind. What comes pouring out, you just let the language come out. However it comes out is fine. Ideally, in the best case scenario with a free write, you're able to keep your pen or pencil moving across the page for the full allotted amount of time. So free write can go on like for 20 minutes or longer, but we're not going to do it that long today. I think we might do it for 5. I have a clock here. I did remember to put it exactly where I needed it. And I'm going to give you a prompt. So I said that classic free writes allow you to just start with whatever's off the top of your head, but we're going to do something a little bit more guided than that. And this is the free write. Okay, consider your navel. I'm just going to read this to you. You might actually, in the comfort of your own home or wherever you are, peer down at it now and describe it. You might think about stories you know about navels. You might think about the word navel that you know in other languages. Whatever hooks your attention first, start there. Then do your best to write continuously for the full 5 minutes, resisting the temptation to go back to read what you've written during this time frame. Not a sprint, so please remember to breathe. I think when I do these myself, sometimes I find myself getting a little bit tight. But wherever this prompt takes you is the right place. So there's no right or wrong here. Just do your best to keep writing for the full 5 minutes. I'm going to start my clock. I'm going to go away and I'm going to come back in 5 minutes. You got this. Okay, you can go ahead and wrap up whatever line you're in. I'm so curious. I'm so curious to hear how that went, where you ended up. In fact, I would like to invite you, if you're feeling brave or not even brave, just playful maybe, to put something in the chat that you arrived to on this free write that you were writing about navel. So it could be a full sentence, it could be a word. There are 42 of you out there in the interwebs in this space. So I don't know, let's just see. Go ahead and put something in the chat. So I think if I'm in the right place, it should be right here. You just click that little chat button and you can put something in there. I would love to see it. I will read them out too, because I think maybe in the audience, you might not be able to see all the comments. So let's see, anybody feels brave. And then maybe Craig and Paige, if anybody can see. Oh, maybe I can see here too, Gail. Gail Kuroda is saying, what makes someone have an outie rather than an innie? Is it the way the doctor cuts the cord? Very common question, which I love that. Thank you, Gail. I did actually find an answer to that. It might not be the most satisfying, but I was curious about that too. Anybody else want to get in the chat? Feeling bold, stepping outside of our regions of comfort, entering conversation with each other today. Don is saying, it pulled me back into my dream from last night in which I was pushing my mom in a wheelchair. Wow, yeah, I mean, I think free writes are these incredible spaces that allow us to enter, I don't know, a non-critically thinking space. And I feel like there's real value in that kind of intuitive connection. Thanks for sharing that, Don. Craig is asking, is the navel on an orange really a navel? If it is, it's actually an anti-navel because by definition it lies at the furthest remove possible from the actual stem or pico while still being part of the orange. Love it. I love it. I have a section on oranges too. Let's do it. Do this. All right. Okay, keep them coming. You're very welcome to keep posting. If you're feeling shy, I would challenge you to step outside of that comfort zone where all the learning and growing lives. If you would feel so moved. Aw, hi Florence. Florence is saying, a long time ago, I had a friend who got a pencil stuck in his belly button and couldn't get it out. That sounds really painful. I hope that your friend is all right. Maybe there had to be medical intervention. I don't know, thank goodness. Of course, it begs the question, how did the pencil get in there in the first place? What's going on here? Okay. Telling stories on our friends, I love it. Kazuo says, navel is basically a fancy way of saying belly button. Yes, accurate. I honestly don't know if that is the actual definition though. Fair. Okay, thank you so much for playing, you all. I appreciate you. I will say that basically when I started this journey into thinking about that epithet of navel-gazer, I in turn started looking at the term navel, because I was really curious about these things too, like how are navels shaped? Navel just is a fancy word for belly button, absolutely. But I basically found myself with like 4 different kinds of voices that were emerging. The first was the dictionary definitions, which, you know, is my first place that I go when I'm curious about a text. I love to visit like the Oxford English Dictionary for definitions. So I went there first to Kazuo, and then in entering the interwebs, I started to find out weird scientific things and some grotesque things that interest me as a human being. Maybe I don't lead in the world with, but nevertheless, something that intrigued me. Of course, I too, like you, Florence, had some kind of memoir that was coming up too, like anecdotes from my life, from my family's lives, around navels, my loved ones, etc., that maybe want to tell some stories on my family in this particular case. And then ultimately, actually the most surprising voice I think that emerged in this inquiry for me was some connections to creation stories and the divine. I mean, being here in Hawaii, the idea of navel and pico was an immediate point of connection that I was aware of, even as kind of an outsider to this place. But beyond that, there were other points of connection that I, deepened my understanding that I was really excited to learn. So I had these 4 very disparate kinds of voices that were jockeying for attention in this story, and I didn't really know how to approach putting this into a text. But I knew that I wanted to. So these are some concepts, creative writing students out there. I would be happy to talk to you more about these if you're not familiar with them. There is a University of Arizona professor who has coined this idea of authorial custody, which basically raises the question, to what extent as creative writers do we want to relinquish control of a text and allow a reader to draw their own conclusions and puzzle things out for themselves? I knew that with this text, I kind of wanted to play with a lower custody form, meaning that I was kind of leaving breadcrumbs for a reader and inviting them to play and see if they could kind of fit the puzzle pieces together themselves. And I also, I think to a certain extent, maybe not when I was writing it, but maybe as I was revising, I was thinking about Lee Gutkind's call to ensure that, moving creative nonfiction texts that appeal to broader audiences tend to have both the public and the private. The public, of course, meaning the stuff that belongs to all of us, the truths about the larger world, the private being the stories about our own lived experiences. And so I know that I wanted to put those together. Lee Gutkind is the editor of Creative Nonfiction magazine. He also has written a series of books, maybe most famously, You Can't Make This Stuff Up, helpful text to look at if you're curious. But beyond that kind of framework, I wanted, maybe even after I wrote this text, but I continue to look to these two authors as critical points of inspiration. If you remember nothing else from this talk today, I hope that you will connect or reconnect with these authors. Right here is Alexis Pauline Gumbs, an incredible writer. And then we have Amy Nesukumatatio on the other edge of this screen. They both have released these texts recently. And if you have not yet had them in your hands, I encourage you to check them out. Undrowned is beautiful and is actually has direct points of connection to Hawaii here. Black feminist lessons from marine mammals. Alexis Pauline Gumbs positions herself as a kind of a biological apprentice to these marine mammals. And then Nesuko Matasio's text, World of Wonders and Praise of Fireflies, Whale Sharks, and Other Astonishments. It has a beautiful collection with really amazing illustrations, actually. But this was the Barnes & Noble Book of the Year. It was named that in December. But anyway, so I continue to draw inspiration from them in terms of how to produce interesting and maybe bizarre creative nonfiction texts that combine the public and the private and invite readers into different ways of seeing the world. Okay, but I mean, in writing this text, I was thinking, I have those 4 disparate voices that I wanted to draw from. I didn't really want to smooth them out and connect them in a smooth way. I sort of liked how they vibrated next to each other, even in jarring transitions, which you might notice when I read a bit from it in a moment. And ultimately, I decided to structure this chapbook as an Abecedarian. So an Abecedarian is an alphabet-based text. Sometimes you can have an Abecedarian where, the poem, like the beginning of the line, starts with each letter of the alphabet and they're all kind of stacked on top of each other. But that's kind of a formal constraint that helps to produce creativity. It wasn't until I actually started putting the text into the Abecedarian form that I learned the history of the form as well, that there's, evidence of it in the Hebrew Bible in Psalm 118. We learn about Abecedarians, maybe without ever knowing that name, in mnemonic devices and word games for kids. But it sort of appealed to me that the alphabet is the building blocks of our language, and to think, that there's something rudimentary, non-argumentative, it's sort of like suggestive more than, pushy, that allowed the text to take form on the structure of the alphabet. I wanted to model curiosity. I wanted to work toward the wonder that Alexis Pauline Gumbs and Amy Nesukumatatio, I think, are such experts at. So these were my goals. See how well I did. Okay, so this is what a table of contents looks like. As you'll see, I have an entry for each letter of the alphabet. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you today, otherwise we'd be here way too long. I think instead I'll read from these sections. If you have come to another reading that I did in the fall for this text, you will be familiar with some of the visual aids that I have packed onto this reading. I think I've also included at least one other section that didn't appear in my primary talk in the fall, so maybe that'll be something new for you. I will also point out that these visual aids are not published in this text. I was leaning on the fact that language and description is enough to sort of drive understanding. But some things, and also some things you can't unsee. And I don't know if I want to get into the weeds of including these kinds of visuals. So not everything grotesque that I found is in this presentation, but nevertheless, I hope you enjoy these visual aids, that it's weird and interesting. We'll see how it goes. All right. We begin with A for abdomen, of course. It's common knowledge that the navel is a round scar in the middle of a person's abdomen produced from the severing of the umbilical cord. An equivalent mark exists on most other mammals, since the mammalian fetus obtains oxygen and nutrients through their abdomen from their birthing mother through the blood vessels of the umbilical cord. Dolphins have navels. Platypuses do not. Today, the navel is a gate surgeons pass through to enter the body. Via a small incision, they can now remove whole organs. Over the telephone and while eating dinner, gynecologists, like my dad, have directed nervous interns to conduct laparoscopic hysterectomies without creating a new scar. No, no, that's the bladder. Move that to the side, he once said, sucking dull from his fingers. We were sitting around the table. My first sleepover friend from my mostly white elementary school sat frozen at the table beside me, stunned already by the challenge of eating Indian food, let alone eating it with her hands. I eventually got up to get her a spoon. The navel might just be a scar. It might be the threshold to the spiritual realm, to our ancestors and those not yet born. It might be something else. Bacteria. In 2012, a team of ecologists in North Carolina published a scientific research paper on their belly button biodiversity project study. They collected samples from 60 people's navels and found 2,300 different types of bacteria living in those human belly buttons. The unique combination of a person's navel bacteria varies from person to person. A person's belly button was found with a bacterium previously discovered only in soil samples from Japan. This person had never visited Japan. Another bacterium found in a sample from one person's navel had previously only been found in the ocean. One person who reported not to have showered or bathed for several years presented with extremophile bacteria, that is, bacteria known to live under extreme environmental conditions, such as ice caps and thermal vents. What are we to do with this information? I ask because there are disgusting things like cheese made from human navel bacteria, and I am not sure what to do with that. Emit. Some of us have deeper navels than others. Based on the accumulation of bacteria and physical objects, those with deeper navels are probably at a higher risk of emitting navel odor. Well, in general, our skin hosts a variety of bacteria crucial to the strength of our body's immune system. Some bacteria, when entering or residing long enough in the navel, start to do strange things. Staphylococcus epidermis, pictured here, when living in the belly button where oxygen is in short supply, ferments sugars and creates what has been called a teeny tiny bit of navel wine. First, the navel is our first wound. Geography. The navel is the center or middle point of a country or sea. In the town of Shibukawa, located in the center of Japan, an annual festival celebrates the belly button. Shibukawa is called the belly button of Japan. In Hinduism, one navel is a geographic marker so crucial it's considered to be the source of the universe. A mountain can also be a navel. Located on the largest of the Hawaiian Islands, Mauna Kea is the tallest mountain in the world measured from the seafloor. Kanaka Maoli recognized Mauna Kea as a piko. A piko is a summit or top of a hill or a mountain. A piko is also a navel string, or umbilical cord. It is the place where leaf attaches to stem. Mauna Kea is piko, is earth, is land, is aina, or that which feeds. For Kanaka Maoli, Aina is more than geography. Aina is ancestor. Aina is sacred. Hashtag protect Mauna Kea. Hashtag ku tia'i Mauna. Mauna Kea is a mountain child of Wakea, sky father, and Papa, earth mother. The peak of the mountain is the piko of the island child, the place where land connects to sky. From these divine parents, a human named Haloa, a name that means long stalk, was born. Before Haloa came a stillborn. This first child was planted in the ground and in turn became the first kalo plant, whose heart-shaped leaves emerged from long stems. Haloa has the responsibility of caring for his older brother, the kalo plant. In turn, the kalo plant cares for Haloa as his important food and ancestor. Kanaka Maoli families rooted to Mauna Kea have placed the umbilical cords of newborn children on Mauna Kea. In this way, human navels connect to mountain navels. Upholding and turning to indigenous relationships to lands that care for and protect that which cares for and protects you, as in Haloa's relationship with Kalo, is likely central to our survival as a species in this climate change-addled Anthropocene. As Kanaka Maoli scholar Brian Kamaui Kuwata has said famously, we live in the future. Come join us. Innie. 30-year-old University of Arkansas student Randon Beasley on August 31st, 2010, made the world record for most quarters fit inside a navel. His is so deep, he fit 30 coins inside, and as the world criteria requires, stood for the duration of the attempt, with all quarters remaining in the belly button, unassisted, for at least 3 seconds. Related records show that the most blueberries fit into a belly button are 10. I could not find information on record-setting outies, though if you look around long enough, you will likely come across a story about a 26-year-old who had a navel that stuck out a full inch from his belly and was offered upward of $1,000 by fetishists for a video of him fondling it. You might shudder at that, as I did. Junction. In English, a navel is also defined as the junction of leaf and stem. This definition is obsolete, though it remains intact in Hawaiian. I wonder if this linguistic severing of Anglophone navels, of the cutting of kinship of plant navels from human navels, might not illustrate how and why so many human communities live like lands and waters are endless commodities to consume, develop, and pollute, rather than care for, are beings that we have dominion over and therefore the right to abuse. As stated earlier, I wonder if mending this wound and putting our weight behind those communities with enduring reciprocal naval connections might be key to the survival of the human species. Lint. The lint in human navels is mostly made up of clothing fibers, hair, and dead skin cells. Lint collecting is an actual hobby. The artist, Rachel Betty Case, has made from belly button lint tiny smiling bears that she traps in bottles. In 2010, the Guinness Book of Records recognized librarian Graham Barker for his collection of belly button lint. Over the course of 26 years, the 45-year-old collected 22.1 grams of the stuff, which would be the equivalent of 110 carats if the lint were actually precious stones or pearls. He sold 3 jars of his lint to a museum, presumably for display. I'm curious which museum would bother to buy that. I'm also curious how much he sold it for. Barker has been quoted as saying, "I will stop collecting when I'm no longer physically capable." I wonder if he's still at it. Mother. The navel is the mark that ties us to the person who gives birth to us. My white mama doesn't have a belly button. Or rather, she doesn't have the one she was born with. It was removed when she had a tummy tuck in the early 90s, and I, her youngest, was about 7 years old. The tummy tuck was an afterthought, actually, because she decided to have a voluntary hysterectomy after receiving an abnormal result from a precancerous pap smear. Her Aunt Anna was in the late stages of ovarian cancer, and our mom didn't want to take chances with the possibility of getting sick. She and our brown dad were also divorcing. Her health coverage was running out. She was going back to school full time too, and she knew that frequent doctor visits to keep an eye on her cervix weren't going to be feasible, financially or time-wise. She'd already stopped menstruating, so it didn't seem like the hysterectomy would be a big deal. Since they were going to do an abdominal approach for the total hysterectomy, laparoscopic hysterectomies hadn't been developed yet. She asked if they could get someone in there to tighten things up a little before they sewed her clothes. 2 for the price of 1, right? She said. The incision would be way down by her pelvic bone. The doctors would free up her skin on her abdomen, including her belly button, and pull it down and then poke a hole again where the belly button was. It would have looked weird not to have a belly button, she said. To create her new navel, the doctors sutured around the tissue and then packed it down to the residual scar of her umbilical cord. It made a nasty looking thing, she said. I look at that sucker and I think, well, fuck that. She accepted sadly that she would never again wear a skimpy 2-piece bathing suit. In the mid-90s, around the time that Joan Osborne dropped the famous song, "What If God Was One of Us," a tip circulated in my 6th grade friend group at our Christian elementary school about belly buttons and God. If someone claims that they were God, we'd know they were telling the truth if they didn't have a belly button. God surely never would have been born in a human way, with moms and placentas and umbilical cord severing that would result in a scar. This story made sense to us, even though the story of Jesus' human birth had been drilled into our heads. Despite my agnosticism, it took me years to untangle the accidental subversion of this theory, despite our Christian training. I wonder if when I was in the 6th grade, my mom no longer had a navel, I would have looked at her differently. The alphabet doesn't have a navel. Since it has 26 letters and 26 is an even number, there is no middle letter. Or we might say that the space between M and N is the invisible navel. In this essay, that navel will be right here. Navel-gazer. Navel-gazer is an insult usually launched at someone who is self-absorbed, who positions their own thoughts and ideas at the expense of a wider view, as if such things are interesting or insightful for anyone other than themselves. Belly button meditation is a real thing, though. Contemplation of one's navel or omphalos kepsis comes from the ancient Greek and involves the use of the navel as an aid in the quest to consider the cosmos or human nature, or to converse with the divine. Some say they've experienced celestial joy during navel gazing. There are actual marble statues depicting omphalos kepsis in the Louvre. 4 Roman men stand hunched over awkwardly, regarding their alabaster abs. Their abs, right, my mom said when I told her this. You sure they weren't questing for something a little lower? Orange. A navel is a kind of orange. It is also the name of the small secondary fruit at the apex of a navel orange, the orange inside the orange. My mom's parents were smart about oranges. They had navel and Valencia trees, which fruit at different times during the year. This meant fresh oranges year round. Grandma would squeeze these fruits into juice that she'd serve in shot-sized glasses to her wee granddaughters. Even now, decades since my last glass, Grandma's fresh squeezed juice is the best I've had. When we were little, my sisters and I learned to sip it slowly. I remember learning in reproductive biology that female babies are born with all the eggs they'll ever have in their lives. I learned that this biological reality is completely unlike males who make and dispense of 1,500 sperm per second. In this sense, females are like nested dolls. To carry a female fetus is to carry all your potential grandchildren too. The belief that we're born with all the eggs we'll ever have has been challenged, but I like this idea that I may have been, on some cellular level, drinking my grandmother's orange juice while my grandma was pregnant with my mother, who was already carrying in her body many of the basic building blocks of potential me. I like this idea of fetus navels connected to invisible maternal navels, backward and forward for eternity. Vishnu. In Hinduism, the navel of Vishnu, the preserver, is the center of the universe and the source of life. Before the universe is created, Vishnu sleeps on Shesha, the giant cobra, the serpent of infinity, who protects Vishnu and floats on the waters of a dark oceanic nothing. Vishnu sleeps peacefully. Then from the inky depths, a resounding Om thrums the darkness with energy. As morning dawns and Vishnu awakens, an elongated stalk emerges from his navel, revealing not a heart-shaped leaf, but a lotus. From the center of the lotus, Brahma is revealed, hatched from an egg. Brahma is the creator of this universe. He uses the petals of his lotus to make our world. After 100 Brahma years, or roughly 3 trillion human years, Brahma attains liberation and pralaya, or massive floods, wash everything away. Vishnu returns to his giant serpent bed to sleep and rest after all his years of caretaking. And then the cycle repeats again and again. In this creation story, from Vishnu's navel, an entire world is born and perishes and is born again. We again have a celebration of the navel as the center of birth and life and creativity. With the lotus, we also return to the enduring image of the navel as the connection of leaf and stem and of the divine. In this story, however, the destruction of the world is inevitable, as is its rebirth. The cycles turn on and on. Our dad, though he was born in India and to Hindu parents, wasn't raised with much to do with Hinduism. He converted to Christianity and assimilated to American life while growing up in segregated North Carolina in the 1950s and 60s. Today, what I've learned about Hinduism in India is largely from books, the internet, and better informed friends. This severance is a kind of violence for us biracial diasporic daughters trying to unfurl our own brown roots and flower. Even without knowing the story of Vishnu's navel, my sister, Joya, went through with a lotus birth with her third child, who she and her husband named Omja Barindra, but who we call Omja, or Om for short. Om was the first of her 7 children to be born at home. The lotus birth involves keeping the placenta and the umbilical cord intact after birth to dry and fall off on its own, a non-severance that honors the connection between placenta and baby, who some think of as being on the same energetic level, to let the baby's consciousness gently enter the body. The lotus birth honors the great transition of moving from the spirit world to the world incarnate, the world of being embodied. Lotus birth protects the baby from their first wounds, though the decomposing placenta and umbilical cord create their own challenges. Some rub the placenta and cord with salt and turmeric to aid the drying process. It took 7 days for Om's umbilical cord to wither and detach naturally. It smelled like the docks, Joya admitted, but it was a nice gesture that we did. Om, who is 17 as of this writing, was also the baby Joya nursed longest. There must be something to that, she said. The lotus birth and his nursing. Om is a gentle boy. He still listens to me. I wonder if, though Om's name came after he was born, the sound of what he would be called might have activated some ancestral knowing in Joya that told her a lotus should be born with him too. Maybe that's a stretch. Maybe not. Finally, probably the worst critique to be launched against writers of creative nonfiction is that they are navel-gazers. The genre is populated by a bunch of narcissists who fling themselves on the outside world. What a snooze. In her contribution to the anthology, The Far Edges of the Fourth Genre, Kim Barnes writes, readers of nonfiction should come away knowing more about themselves than they do about you. The emphasis, which appears in the original, might be a little hostile. But how do readers learn about themselves? By reading about someone else. If writing creative nonfiction hones important writerly tools, self-reflection, meaning-making, attempts at understanding ourselves in relation to the world around us, reading creative nonfiction text means observing the author's tools in practice. At the risk of sounding defensive, and maybe a little hostile too, the appeal of reading this genre might be the unspoken invitation to experiment with the author's tools so you can learn more about yourself. Take this essay, for example. You too can play an awkward game of finding odd facts about an enduring insult that gets you thinking about how your navel piercing was your own little adolescent act of individuating, or your mom's funny scar that's taken the place of her real belly button. And then you might learn about overlapping and diverging stories of creation, of leaves and stems, of long stalks and yoke stalks, and how full the world is of strange people and the things they make within it, including their very personal, very private, very disgusting navel products. Why not try it? See what you find in your metaphoric or literal navel. It might be body gunk. It might be the wounds we need to heal. It might be a portal to the divine. What's there will vary from person to person. But go on, take a look already. Thank you.
Ooh. And thank you. We have probably about 15 minutes. If people would like to pose questions or comments in the chat, I will either relay those to Anjoli or she'll read them herself. And to just get us started, could you talk a little bit about the actual writing process? Did you start with A and end with Z, or how did you go about actually conceiving of the project?
Yeah, so I mean, thank you for that question, Craig. I started off by looking at the Oxford English Dictionary, and I was looking at navel-gazer, which then opened up a larger inquiry into the word navel. And I found that the text, like that the word was going in so many different directions that I thought was really interesting. And for example, like the entry for H is horse, and it's that the middle point on a horse's back was once called a navel, even though their physical navel is on their belly. There's all these weird things that crop up in language. Who knows why that part of the horse's body was called that. But I started there. I started in the dictionary, and I literally just printed out all the pages of the Oxford English Dictionary that had to do with navel. And then I was like circling entries that I was like, that's weird, or I want to learn more about this. And then I went down some rabbit holes just from some pretty basic Googling. I, found the Guinness Book of World Records, and, there are videos of things that you can't unsee. Like you can actually see the video of the guy putting the 30 quarters in his navel, which looks horribly painful, by the way, as you can imagine. But yeah, it was basically an amassing of content first. And then I had that big question of what am I going to do with this? And I knew it wasn't going to be a straightforward beginning to end kind of narrative that had necessarily a cohesive thread that ran through the middle of it. So I had to utilize a structure that felt justified to organize the content instead. And that's how I ultimately arrived at the Abecedarian as the structure. But it wasn't until after I had already amassed all this content. And like, I knew that I was like, oh gosh, navels, and my mom doesn't even have her birth navel, which is so weird. And I didn't read the section about my navel piercing, my like terrible navel piercing when I was a teenager. But all of that was sort of in front of me before I imposed the structure on it. But yeah, I was living in a studio, and my partner was definitely trying to sleep, and I was definitely like cracking up and cringing in front of our like communal like laptop late into the night, learning more than I thought I would ever about navels during the process.
Wait a second. Okay, Paige, would it be possible to unmute Aiko?
Yes, I'm going to make her a co-host too, so she can turn her video
Sorry.
audio on. Good. It's
Sorry.
good.
Thank you, Anjoli. Thank you
Hi,
for sharing such personal and public stories and the writers that you admire. I really appreciate it. It was nice to sink into the reading and to do the free write activity too. I have two questions, and I think they're a little. I feel confused about asking them, so feel free to ignore any part of it that doesn't make sense. But my first question, I guess going off of these form questions, is I was just thinking about how a lot of your work is long and deep and like going deeper and deeper into something. And I was experiencing the rhythm of switching alphabet letters, and you have to like go a little bit and then switch, go a little bit and switch. And it's a very different, I think, experience, rhythm, attention span. I don't know. We're still going deeper, but it's a different I keep saying the word rhythm. It's a different something. So I'm curious about how you thread things, or if we're meant to just like go a little bit and then turn around. Yeah, I guess I'm curious about your reflections on that is my first question. My second one is, I was thinking about the framing you shared about public and private stories. And then I was wondering I was thinking about the difference, and I've heard you talk you've thought so deeply about the ethics of how do you tell personal stories, how do you tell family stories, and you have to tell them very carefully and with a certain responsibility, and think about like story of my mom, how am I going to write that and put it in a public space? So I was thinking, okay, private stories we have more responsibility for maybe, but then I was thinking, but public stories can be very personal too. Like, is Mauna Kea a public story, or is it a personal story? Is a story about the Okinawan, like the Battle of Okinawa, for me, is that a personal story or a public story? And I think I feel like I have responsibility, even though it's a very big story, the way that I talk about it, or if I have any story, or if I do any storytelling around it, then I have some kuleana there too. So I don't know. I was just thinking about that distinction and wondering if public stories really are they free for all? Is that story about the librarian who collected belly lints? Is that a public story, or is that his private story? So yeah, sorry, it's not a question. Thank you.
Hi, I love you. Thank you for both of those. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those questions. I would say, I'm doing it more recently, and I wonder if it's just like pandemic induced short attention span that has led me to be interested in more of like a vignette form, or something that sort of maybe feels scatterbrained, but kind of allows an image to build over multiple segments that get interrupted or interrupt each other. But you're right. I mean, I think in the past, I normally would write something kind of more directly, like looking directly at a question or looking directly at a family story or an experience that I was trying to make sense of. And I don't know, I think for this, because I was coming at it out of genuine curiosity, I sort of wanted to model that in the way that the text appears on the page. And the images, of course, are another interruption in conveying it orally this way. But I sort of wanted to replicate that feeling of turning pages, and that those drastic shifts in content and tone would sort of exist across the negative space or the white space of the page. So that was kind of part of what I was thinking about that. But it's true, it's kind of a new space for me. I don't think it's necessarily where I'm going to set up my writing house forever. When I think about the family narratives that I'm still working on that were the backbone of my dissertation, those tend to be ones that I'm trying to lock eyes with and kind of do the work to stare it down a bit more directly than a form like this, which is intended to be playful. I love your question about the distinction between the public and the private. I think I'm not a journalist. And I believe that no matter what I'm writing about, ultimately, I have responsibility to how I'm presenting it on the page. I think it's a really good question, about that librarian who was saving his belly button lint. I mean, I literally learned about that through news articles. So it was newsworthy, and then it sort of drastically falls off the radar of news coverage around him and this curious hobby that he had. That's certainly private. And yet I think in the way that story was elevated to the internet and kind of, not even behind a paywall, that it was just available on a, I'm forgetting the newspaper off the top of my head, but it was a major UK newspaper, that in some ways it does become public, but yeah, that doesn't change, I think, my responsibility to that. I mean, if I met Graham Barker, would he be upset with the way that I'm positioning his belly button lint collection? I would hope not. I mean, in some ways, I don't think I necessarily am denigrating what he did or underscoring any questions about it beyond what the articles themselves did, which were the source for that story. And yet, who knows how he felt about those stories, the newspaper stories. So I think you're right. I think in this field of life writing and writing within the genre of creative nonfiction, there's always a responsibility to story. I mean, thinking about Mauna Kea in particular too, that section was initially shorter, and I hadn't included the whole story of Palawa. And I remember I had showed a draft to Brian because I wanted to make sure that he was okay. Brian Kamali Kuwata, who I quote in that segment. And I wanted to make sure that he felt comfortable with the way that I was positioning that quote, "We live in the future, come join us." And he was like, was supportive and said, you know, oh, you might want to kind of underscore that piece about how like leaf attaching to stem. And I think we were kind of chatting over Facebook Messenger, and I like went away for like 30 minutes and then came back and was like, what about this section? And I had developed it and written this whole thing. And he was like, of course, you're going to go and do an extra credit version of something very simple that I was recommending. Then I asked him, I was like, you know, I'm not Hawaiian. I'm not from Oceania. I'm an outsider from this place. I'm asking myself right now, is it appropriate of me to retell this story? And I don't even know if Brian's still here, but Brian, he was sort of teasing me the way that he likes to. Brian likes to tease folks. And he said, oh yeah, how dare you retell a story that we teach our 5th graders? And anyway, so I ultimately decided to go with that. But I also was trying to think about it in context of what are the kind of creation stories and navels that come from the traditions that are maybe closer to the genealogies of my ancestors as well. So that was why the section on Vishnu was really important for me, even though I felt really uncomfortable writing that too. So I was like, my dad is not even a practicing Hindu. How dare I tell the story of the creation of the universe and Vishnu's navel? And then our other friend, Rajiv Mahabir, whose memoir is coming out this year, said, how dare you not tell the story of Vishnu's navel in this collection? So yeah, the kuleana, the responsibility and privilege for each of these are always high. And even though the text is intended to be playful, I hope it reflects that care. Thanks, Aiko.
Okay, 2 brief announcements here. First of all, Aiko Yamashiro, just as an advertisement, on April 29th, same time, same place, Aiko Yamashiro will be the presenter in the Brown Bag Seminar Series. So please make sure. She's going to be talking about Nahua Ea and building decolonial community, writing poetry with Aina and each other. So please attend that. And the second thing is that we have another question here. What I will indicate though is we usually end these at 1:15. So if you log off or have to log off, thank you for attending. We'll keep it open for a little bit longer so that we can deal with the last couple of questions here. Okay, the question here is from Liam. How do you maintain a fertile, open mind for a creative writing session, i.e. environment, writing practices, pre-writing rituals, etc.?
I feel like all the writing teachers who I look up to say that you have to have a regular practice and that you're showing up for the page or the screen, however you write, on a regular basis. I do journal every morning. I am a morning pages person. Those of you out there who know what I'm talking about will know what a morning page is. But I mean, I would confess that in the midst of everything that's happened in this past year, I've not been writing as much. I think it's difficult. It can always be difficult. And yet also those 2 model authors who I pointed to at the start of this talk, like Amy Nesuku Matatil and Alexis Pauline Gums, have been such points of inspiration for me too, in thinking about ways to approach storytelling and kind of vibrant and invigorating ways to think about story and our lives and the world around us. And that's been a lifeboat, I think, for me in the middle of this pandemic. So I would say that reading is super helpful. Reading and finding texts and authors who you love and who inspire you. That's what helps to bring me back to the page. And being in a community of writers who ask you for your work and who want to swap stories with you, I feel like is another thing to kind of keep the creative well with water. I don't know. I don't have a literal well in my life. How do wells work? You get the idea.
I'm going to sort of bookend Gail Kuroda's question, which is also about, do you have advice on how to carve out personal writing time, which you just answered for Liam. So what I'm going to do is move to Joy Anamoto's question, which is, so much of your writing is quite visceral. Although the intent is somewhat playful, you are revealing something much more emotional and painful. Can you speak to this process?
Yeah, thanks, Joy. Hi, Joy. I love you. Yeah, I think my default when I'm thinking about something painful or that's hard to talk about, but that I feel I need to, is to like crack a joke or to try to keep it light. And I think that I've definitely been in therapy sessions where I've been called out for that. Just needing to like say accurately what you're going through and being able to sit with that and know that it's not going to drive everyone you love away from you if you're going through something difficult. Yeah, I mean, I think probably less so maybe in this collection or in this essay, but maybe more so in my other work. I think I've been trying to hold myself more accountable to the emotional resonance and like the kind of truth of that emotional resonance that I'm trying to address or reveal or work through or model for a reader. And part of that, I think, you know, I have the privilege of having a family that is really supportive of my writing. And I mean, I remember writing my dissertation, and which is a collection of stories about my family. And I remember sending it to I tell the story a lot, so forgive me if you've heard it, but I shared it with my family, and I have a family of readers. Like, not everybody has family who like actively and voraciously reads everything that they publish. But I sent it to them as my last round before I was submitting the final version, I think, for my defense. And they were all jockeying and kind of posturing and being like, I'm gonna read it first. I'm gonna finish first, and I'm gonna stay up all night, and you know, talking a lot of smack to each other. This is my sisters and my parents, and they all went silent once I sent it to them. And then my dad, who I had my money on as being the one who was gonna make it through first, he texted me halfway through the day, and he was like, "This is hard. It's making for teary and beautiful reading. I love you. I have to take a break." And he finished it the next day. It's not like he couldn't come back to it. And it's not like he couldn't talk to me about what I wrote. But that was a really rough 48 hours of waiting for my family to tell me if it was okay that I wrote us the way that I did. And yeah, like I said, I've had the privilege of having their support in so many ways, but that's not always the case. It's like a huge privilege, I feel like, that I've had as a writer. I don't know if that answers your question, Joy. I'm sorry.
Okay. I think Joy's answer is yes, it does. So on that note, I'll suggest that the last thing we should do is look into our hearts or our navels and thank Anjoli for a wonderful afternoon.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for having me.